Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Hello, Northland family and friends. It is awesome to be with you here on Extra Takes. As you can tell, I am not Matt Shiles, and this isn't Pastor Josh. So I am Tom Horvath. I am the guest host today simply because we have guests in our presence this weekend, Kevin and Sherry Harney. But I hesitate to call them guests because they're really family. This is now the third time that you've been here. Each time you come, in addition to you, Kevin, preaching at all of our services, this time we're doing 3 different workshops, and you get to speak into our lives as well. So this is just reuniting with friends. So welcome back. Welcome back, Kevin and Sherry.
Great to be. Always enjoy to be here.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's feeling like family.
Yeah,
Good.
We look forward to it each time.
Matter of fact, I was going to ask if I could borrow some money. Okay, we're not.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sorry.
He's going to say, if you're family, the answer is no.
Exactly. Yeah, see, you've been in ministry a while.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of that, so a little bit of your story, a lot of ministry in the state of Michigan, a lot of, most recently in the state of California, and now you're here with us for the last couple of years because of Pastor Josh. That's the connection. So there's probably a few listeners in our Extra Takes audience that maybe haven't heard the connection that you have with Pastor Josh. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll share a couple of things that maybe I think I haven't shared even with those who have heard, and we'll keep it interesting for them too. I met Josh, probably, I didn't meet him at this time, but I probably started doing work with the Billy Graham Center 20 years ago. Okay. And then some years back, through a series of different leadership transitions, Josh came on the team at the Billy Graham Center. And so for some people may not know his background there, but he kind of became the number 2 guy working with Ed Stetzer. And so because I was part of a team that Ed was convening and gathering, we were together gathering key national leaders, he began to hand some of that over to Josh, and Josh began to lead that team. And I'd been doing that with Ed for years. And so I immediately just liked Josh. His passion for Jesus, his sense of humor, his joy for life, his love for his family. Just kind of, you meet some people and you're kind of like, oh, they're nice. And you meet some people and you go, I want to hang out with them because they're. So we became friends.
Well, hang out with them or borrow money from them, right?
Exactly. That's the family thing. And so we became friends through that and started doing work together through that. I was going through a season where I was drawing near the end of my. Kind of my tenure being a senior pastor, because Sherry and I started a ministry called Organic Outreach International, and we were feeling the call to lead that as the primary leaders for a season and then get that ready for the future. And so when I thought about Shoreline, this church that we loved, we'd been serving together at that time, probably it would have been about 13, 14 years, moving towards a 15-year kind of transition, I thought, what about Josh as a potential next lead pastor? He has a passion for preaching. He's a gifted leader. And so we actually pursued him. He came out and preached a couple times. And after a couple times being there, before he left, before he and Joni left to come back to Florida, he pulled me aside. He said, listen, the answer is yes. We're coming. I got to pray with the family, but man, I love this place. We're in. And
I don't know that he was in Florida at the time.
No, he was in.
No. I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
He was in Chicago.
Thank you. Yeah, he was going back to Chicago. Yeah,
I'll just correct.
Thank you. Just straighten me out.
We need the fact checking every once in a while. Thank you, Sherry.
It was Chicago.
So if I say 3 years ago, she'll say it was 7 years ago. If I say 7 years, she'll say it was 2.
But they were
and she's always right. But they were in Chicago. So he went back to Chicago, and about a week and a half later, he called me, and he said, our families talked and prayed, and we're not all on the same page. And as he began to share what was going on, I just realized, okay, this is not God's hand. If God's hand is in it, the whole family's in. There's a unified spirit, and they weren't there. And so I just said, Josh, I said, God knows who the right next leader is. And this was funny. So he says to me, so I'm not going to be able to come and be the pastor there. But he said, one of the things I was excited about was that you were going to mentor me for a couple of years as we did the transition. He said, I'm not going to come be the pastor, but he said, will you mentor me anyways? And I prayed about it, as I always do, and I said, I'd love to. So the first 2 years, not too much later than that, he came here. So for about 6 months, before he came here, I started meeting with him once a month online. And probably the first year and a half, 2 years he was here as a pastor, when God called him here to Northland, we met every month to talk, to pray, to bounce things off each other. And he would say I was mentoring him, but I would say we were mentoring each other. Josh got so much to offer. So and that friendship continued to grow. And then he said, hey, well, what about you and Sherry coming out and doing some preaching? And met you and Gus, and we struck up a friendship. And it felt like maybe God had more in mind. And that's so now. What else did I say wrong?
No, you did it all. That was great, Kevin.
Thank you, honey.
Kev. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, we have 3 sons, and they're all in their middle to late 30s now.
Yeah.
All married, wonderful, beautiful Christian women, and now we have 5 grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have 5 grand dogs too. That's important.
You're a dog
love
family,
our
okay.
yeah. And so, kind of a neat story about our family though is that when we came to Shoreline 17 years ago, the boys were all in college, and one was in LA, one was in Chicago, one was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and so we just really had this sense that Shoreline wouldn't really be their home because
It's in Central California, other side of the country.
yeah. And that was hard for me, but I had to give that up to the Lord and was able to. But one by one, the boys would come to visit us in their summer breaks. And then one by one, they would fall in love with a staff person
At Shoreline.
at Shoreline.
Wow.
Yeah.
And one by one, they'd leave and take my staff away.
So all 3.
So you'd gain a daughter-in-law,
Yeah.
but you lost a staff member.
For sure, but Shoreline
Yeah.
offered us 3 beautiful daughter-in-laws, which we, that Ephesians passage that says more than you could even hope, imagine, pray for, we would have never thought that when we came to Shoreline that God had waiting the rest of our family and our grandchildren now because of that. And so the little funny part of that was the first girl, Christine, was the hospitality director. And when she left the job, the new girl was Taylor from Florida, and she took the hospitality job. So Christine fell in love with Zach, the first one. And when Taylor came along, she fell in love with our second son. So the joke was, who's the next hospitality director?
You get to hire your daughter-in-law.
Whatever.
Wow.
But she was a worship leader.
Worship leader.
Yep.
Okay.
Brandon was a
But
worship
anyways,
leader,
Great.
only God. And we give God the glory for that. Yeah. So
Praise God. That's great. And Bryn, I've had an opportunity to
Yeah.
at least back
Now
and
she's
forth
working
some
with
emails,
us.
and she's working in the ministry as
Yeah.
well.
Doing an
And
amazing
she's doing
job.
a great
She
job.
was actually a news anchor.
yeah. In California.
Right out of college, she got a high-level job in the Central California area as a weekend anchor. She got to fly with the Blue Angels or one of those groups. She got amazing experiences, and she felt called out of that to worship leading.
Wow.
And then and now she's just loving being a mom, but also now is working with us with Organic Outreach, and it just has brought amazing gifts to the team.
That's fantastic. Well, a couple of themes there: family, teamwork,
Right.
and this is the 3rd time that I've had the privilege of hosting and working with you, both whether it's workshops or behind the scenes, as well as planning calls on Zoom and things like that. So I've got to watch you two work.
In real time. Right?
And we don't hide much. We put it out there.
But that's the deal. I know you well enough where you're not you're genuine, and it has been and will continue to be just a joy to watch you guys work together. And
Thank you.
the question I'm leading
Thank
up
you.
to after I share something else, but the question I'm leading up to is, how do you work together in ministry, whether it is at the same church or if someone, maybe they don't work at the church at all, but as a family, you're in ministry. But as I was thinking about the joy I have watching you guys work and minister and cut up and with each other, a couple of weeks ago, we had the Winter Olympics.
Okay.
And I thought about the pairs figure skating. Now, each individually, these skaters could be going for the gold. I mean, they're very, very competent. but yet they choose to do it together.
Right.
And when you watch a pair's figure skating together, there's something special. You know, they lean into each other to go even faster.
Right. Yeah.
There's usually
Great
a lot of
picture.
grace, you know, from the female, and then the strength of the male. And I think when I watch a couple like you work together, I see the beauty of that. So. That's a huge compliment to you. But my question is, how do you do ministry together? And for a couple who maybe aren't employed by the church, how do they do ministry together? Give us some tips, tricks, lessons learned, never do this.
Before you give the tricks or the lessons, that's a great picture, because that is a picture of us, because we're very different. In every way.
And I'm designed for figure skating. So it works. But we bring different things to the table, so you can see that.
No, but
and Sherry laughs at his jokes, too. That's part of this magic.
You know what? It's so true. I always sit through every sermon. If there's
be three or four,
three
it doesn't matter how
services,
many times I preach,
I've done that my whole life. But with him, and
everybody in our church always thought, well, Sherry comes to our service. Because she does.
She does, yeah.
But she would.
And I don't put that any other supportive spouse. But for me, I love it. It's not hard. But I will still laugh, even if I've heard the joke a couple of times. It's true love, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm truly funny, so it works out. It works out well.
And humble too, right?
No, but it's funny. It's a funny thing, because we are so totally different. We even laugh a lot about the differences, because, like, even small differences, like, he's a loud talker, I'm a quiet talker, and that.
We could be at a restaurant and I'll say, honey, I can't hear you. And she'll say, but you're yelling. And I'm like, I'm not yelling, I'm just talking. And
anyways, all that to say, so it's quite a feat if we look like we're pulling it off, because there's a lot of differences. But Kevin.
Well, I think one of the things that makes it work for us, and I know you're asking a question about kind of transferable principles for any couple out there that wants to serve together, work together, do life together. And so one of the things I think it's one of our greatest strengths is that we deal with stuff and we keep short accounts. So there's not sort of a seething underbelly of stuff that hasn't been resolved. We work through stuff, even tough stuff, in real time. When we first got married, Sherry had grown up in a family where she didn't see her parents, fight. And I remember early in our marriage, Sherry's dad said to me, he said, sometimes when you and Sherry fight in front of us, it can be a little uncomfortable. And I said, sure, when you've never seen Sherry and I fight. So he described it. I said, oh, that's just us talking. That's just how we communicate, because we work through stuff. But then we learned also for them, we just need to be a little less, open with that in that particular environment. And it wasn't that they were upset, it just they were used to seeing that. So early in our marriage, we realized that we had to deal with things as they came up. And I think because of the environment Sherry grew up in, she wasn't quick to do that. So she saved up for quite a few months of just things that I'd say to her, I've never been married before. I don't know am I doing okay? Oh yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great. Something I can do better? No, you're doing great. And there were things I could be doing better. And so finally she kind of let all that out and told me. And she said, from now on, if something comes up, I'm just going to tell you. And I said, please. I said, and so is that fair, Sherry? I think we deal with stuff, and we don't do it a lot in front of other people. And there's not like there's anger or resentment. It's just our differences are there. We've got to work through it to make sure we keep the machine oiled and working well. And so I think one of the things we do is we deal with stuff and our differences, and we talk it through. And at the end of the day, Sherry's still very much who she was when I met her. And she's still quieter than I am. She still doesn't like spicy food. There's a lot of, but there's also ways that I am that aren't changing, but we know how that works, and we've learned to navigate that.
That's what I was going to say too. Just a respect for the big differences, and that together. I think one of the things that has held us together is to be so clear about what our mission is. I think when your goal is the same, and the goal that you're reaching toward is a high goal, right? It's worth it. Then you can step back at the right time when you keep your eye, on following what Jesus has called us to do. And so I think it's a respect of the differences, but also that one common goal that is really the high point.
Yeah.
And
another piece, I think, too, and this is very mutual, is a willingness to sacrifice. Sherry, through the years, as a lead pastor, and for pretty much most of my adult life, I've been a lead pastor in a larger church with a lot of demands. And so the church Shoreline Church, just shy of 50 people on staff, but a staff of 50 people. I didn't manage everybody, and I had an executive, chief of staff, but there's been things that Sherry's had to give up so I can fulfill them, going back to fulfill the mission that Christ has called us to. And so we talk through what our needs are, and we make sure that we're not lacking the care for each other that we need to extend. But also there's, in both of our cases, when we're involved in doing what God's called us to do, you're giving something up, you're sacrificing something. And I'm willing to sacrifice when God's calling Sherry to something. She's willing to sacrifice when God's calling me to something. And then when we're both called to it, we both have to sacrifice to kind of get there. And I think that that's a lost understanding. When Jesus said to follow him, he said, okay, here's how you follow me.
Take up the cross.
Take up the cross. We want to die every day. Deny yourself and follow me. You're like, well, that's not easy. And it wasn't designed to be easy. It was designed to be sacrificial. And I think that's part of our journey is, and then we have fun together. We play a game at least once a day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, but we have like 3 to 5 to 10 minute games. We'll play backgammon. We've had a run of cribbage, a game called Quicks, which is a dice game, a new game we're playing called Flip 7, which we played today already. And I had Sherry's, a little break time. I said, sure. And what does it take? Maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah, we do every day.
I can't remember who won the last game.
Yeah. You did.
It doesn't.
You did.
It doesn't really. It doesn't really matter.
But then who won the 2 before that?
That would be you.
No, but
I have a short memory.
But it actually, they're not long games, but it just having fun together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Laughing a
laughing
lot.
and
that helps a lot.
It does.
I think. Yeah.
Wow.
It does.
I love that one because, both of you are very successful authors in your own right.
Thank you.
This isn't just about, well, Kevin's a senior pastor and, oh, by the way, here, you both are powerhouses when it comes to ministry. I would imagine there are times when you're both cranking out the books and deadlines and all of that, and you're probably in the same room at home, or if you're on the road like you are this week, you're in the same hotel room.
Yeah.
So calling those
true.
timeouts, going,
Yeah.
hey, let's see if you can beat me at cribbage this time. That's
Exactly.
a great break. And that applies to any relationship, any marriage, those little breaks of just, hey, let's just have a little bit of fun here.
If you have to think about when's the last time we laughed together, or when's the last time we had
that's
fun
not a
together,
good thing,
and it can't come. When was the last time? That's not good.
Yeah.
It should be when in the last 24 hours, and that doesn't mean there aren't seasons that are tough. It doesn't mean there aren't times where you have to really pour out. But along the way, if you can't laugh and play, and sometimes we look at each other and just say, we're so honored by God and privileged to get to serve Jesus together. And we look at what we do with serving our family, the church, Organic Outreach International, the people that use our written resources around the world. All those are different kinds of ministry, but they're all an honor. And we didn't plan on, we didn't know what doors God was going to open, but we have fun walking through them together.
Yeah.
Another question, which, by the way, I didn't prepare you for. I just
no
thought of
worries.
it because I know both of your earlier stories. Kevin, you did not grow up in a Christian home, whereas Sherry, you very much did.
Yes.
Talk to me about some of those early. Now, Kevin was a Christian when you guys got married.
That's true.
But even you were mentioning Sherry's father going, hey, you guys are fighting. And you're like, no, we're just having a conversation. Could you maybe go back and talk about some of those early years where it's just Kevin and Sherry in love with Jesus, but again, the prior X number of years was really different. Could you share anything?
Well, one story that we tell is Kevin because he wasn't raised in the church, and I grew up in a family that was really committed to supporting the church. tithing, and he did not grow up with that concept at all. And so even
my parents were kind and generous, but they didn't give towards a ministry or church, so that I didn't have a framework for that. Yeah.
And so Kevin, he kind of tells the story that when we were talking about, I think we were engaged, or we were going to get engaged.
We were engaged, and Sherry asked me questions, which was the right. She said, well, tell me about your practices of giving, your generosity towards the Lord. And that's an important, when in our book, Organic Disciples, we have 7 markers of spiritual growth. One of them is joyful generosity. It's a central theme in the ministry of Jesus and in the scriptures, is that we not only are generous, but we do it joyfully. So she was just asking me, well, how mature are you in this area? And so it was funny because she said to me, so like, what do you give? How much do you give towards the work of Jesus? And I got sneaky. I said, Sherry, I give everything. I give my whole life. Oh. See what I did there?
How Sunday school answer. Jesus.
That wasn't what she was at. So she said, and so
she was on staff.
Oh, I was going to seminary. I was planning on being a pastor, and so she asked me. No, at that point I was in.
Were you?
Was I in seminary then? I must have been. Yeah, because you came. Yeah. So I was just starting seminary. So I was trained to be a pastor, and she says, no, what do you actually give? And I said, well, I give everything. And she goes, and the answer was I was giving nothing. And I kind of the church doesn't pay me enough, and I'm serving Jesus, and he can have it all, but I wasn't taking any meaningful portion of what I earned and giving it to the work of Jesus and trusting God to take care of it from there. And so she basically, in so many words, said to me, I can't marry a man who's going to live unfaithfully to God. So you need to figure this out before we get married.
Yeah. I actually did. Because I grew up with a dad who, when he got his paycheck, and I watched it because it was in cash. My dad's 87, he's still living, and he had envelopes. But the first envelope that got filled was the tithe. Yeah. And then so I got, what a gift my parents gave me. So that was just what you did as a Christ follower. And then he'd put that 10% in that envelope. He'd put it on top of the refrigerator, and he'd grab it before he left every Sunday. And so it was just part of being a part of the church, loving God, giving, your life to Jesus. And so I told him, I actually told him, I said, I can't marry you if you don't see that as important.
Yeah. And we dug into the scriptures together, and she taught me all she knew. We got and as I walked through the scriptures, I realized it's not, you can say I give 100% to God, but Malachi talks about you're taking what actually belongs to God and spending on yourself. And so we made that shift, and we've never looked back. And God, and you have to understand, when we got married, I said to Sherry, you have to be comfortable with the fact that we'll probably never own a house. We'll have a home, because a home is a condition of the heart, right? We'll have an apartment we'll live in, or but I said, if we're going to live in California, you want to have kids and raise our kids, and you want to be present with them. You can't, on a pastor's income, you can't own a home in California, Southern California, where we lived. And we went out and looked at homes and looked at costs and realized it wasn't in the cards. And so she said before we got married,
the one place we first looked at, I got in the car,
just wept,
and I just cried. Because I was like, it was a crummy. It was like a dream.
It was a crummy little condo looking at the freeway.
Yeah, it was a dream.
We couldn't afford it.
Well, and I knew, and with what I saw, I just remembered crying and thinking, okay, this is going to be a sacrifice I need to make. Now,
she grew up in West Michigan, where you'd get your first little home, and after a couple of years, you'd upgrade to another home. And homes cost a fraction in Michigan of what they cost in California. So.
But the Lord was gracious, and we did get a home. So,
but the point being that we made that commitment to give generously, knowing that we would probably never live in a house of our own, and that was okay as long as we honored God by being generous. And then God has honored that by providing in ways that we couldn't have imagined. And then that's allowed us to continue to grow in our generosity. And so that's been part of our journey together as a young couple. That was an early.
But that was one of those, not being raised in a Christian home, you come together.
And but you're different, disagreement, talk about it, pray about it, work it through. live into it, and that's a couple year process. And that's kind of what you're asking is like for couples, how do you navigate those things? It didn't just happen over an evening of talking and praying. It was a couple years of us walking into that. When we first got married, we both had sort of what I would call kids' beds. I don't know if you remember. I'll date myself, but the old I Love Lucy, where they had like a nightstand between these two little single beds in their bedroom. But Sherry had like a little single bed, and I had a little single bed because we'd never been married and we'd never. And so when we got married, we actually wanted to get a big enough bed that we could sleep in together. We thought that would be practical, and
that was a huge purchase for us.
Remember what we paid a month?
Was it $17 a month
for our first
for a bed?
We were so broke that we couldn't afford to buy a bed, and so we got it, and we paid interest on our first bed at $17 a month for like 3 or 4 years to pay for the bed. That's how broke we were. Wow. But we also. The first time I started giving, I was making $400 a month. I was working full time for a church that was paying me $400 a month, $100 a week. But $400 a month, okay, $40 a month. That's not hard to figure out. It's just hard to do because but we ate more top ramen than we would have. We were more careful. I remember early in our marriage, we each had our own spending money. Every 2 weeks,
$5.
we each got $5, and I could do anything I wanted with it.
Wow.
And I didn't have to. I'd buy like a frozen yogurt for like $1.50, and I'd kind of work it across. But it's like that was the real world for us.
Yeah.
But we loved it. It was part of that. That was a great season. Yeah,
it's part of your story.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
part of your story now.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Absolutely.
And I was going to say, and what courage for you. To call that out before you get married, but really it was conviction.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not going here.
Yeah.
And, it'd been a lot easier to go, well, I'll change him once I marry him.
Yeah.
Wow.
We always talk about in organic outreach, the 2 Timothy 2 verse that talks about 4 generations of discipleship. And, fortunately, I was discipled by 2 godly parents. Yep. It was just a way of life, and so they did a great job of instilling and like that moment wasn't hard for me. It was just like, this is what it's going to be.
And we just sent her folks flowers last week for their
67th
anniversary.
Yeah, and they're both doing fantastic.
They live in their home together. They're doing great. It's amazing to watch.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, in addition to just hanging out and having fun and teaching workshops, Kevin, you delivered the word this weekend, and the title of the sermon was God's Transforming Power. And one of the early points in the sermon was about outreach, and I probably won't get the quote right, but something about, people need to really believe that we really believe what we say we believe, and how that can be a detriment to them finding Jesus. So could you tell a little bit more about that? Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, because I grew up in a context where I didn't understand religion at all. I grew up in I would say my parents were somewhere between agnostic and atheistic at different times, but not faith. And so I didn't look at people who were religious and think, oh, how rich and wonderful it is. And I look now at many people that look at us as Christians, and the line I use is I say, I think many non-Christians, they don't believe that we actually believe what we say we believe. They think we're playing church. They think we're doing religion. They think it's just a crutch. They think it's a way to pacify ourselves. But they don't believe that we've met God personally. They don't believe that his power is unleashed in our lives. They don't believe that we're in love with Jesus. They don't even know if we really believe any of this stuff. They just think we're just doing religion. And so in the message, one of the areas of focus is that our testimony, our story of our conversion, that's powerful. But we have hundreds of testimonies. We have new stories every week if we're walking close with Jesus, of God's presence. Man, he was with me when I needed him to be. Of his power, I wouldn't have made it through, but God helped me through. His presence, his power, his purpose. I have meaning in life. I'm not just floating through life. I have meaning in life. His protection. Man, this was happening, and if God hadn't been there to protect me, it could have gone really badly. And so God's purpose, God's protection, God's provision, God's power, and that's God's power. And I think I have one more P word in there. But the idea is that when we tell a story to a non-believer, and I do this a lot with some of my siblings before they became Christians. I grew up in a home of 5 kids, atheistic home, and one by one, all 5 kids committed their hearts to Jesus. And my dad would just be like, where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong here? And my dad eventually became a believer before he passed away. But with my siblings and with my dad, I would tell stories of God's leading and God's direction. One time I told my dad about how Sherry and I were praying about giving towards the whole project our church was doing, and how independently God called us both to give above and beyond what we even had in all of our savings and anything. And that God gave us both the exact same number. And I remember sitting across at Mimi's Cafe talking to my dad, and when I told that to my dad, I watched him kind of take a breath, and then I saw tears start to form in his eyes. And my mom had passed away, and I don't know what was going through his mind, but I think in his mind was the idea that could there be a God who would actually speak to my son Kevin and to his wife, and look how how our hearts were joined together. And that was one of the things that I think God used to move him the next step towards Jesus. And so those stories, at that moment, my dad wasn't thinking about me, oh, he doesn't believe in this. He's thinking, this is real. This is dangerously life-changing. And my son has encountered God. And that, I think, caused him to wonder, then could I encounter God? Could God guide me like that? And that's where our story. So again, a transformational faith, a faith that's transformed by the power of God, leads us to a place where we have all kinds of stories to tell about how God's at work. And when we share those stories with people that don't know Jesus, they don't think we're crazy, and they don't think that's a lie. I think what goes through their mind is, maybe God is real. And if God protected you, could he protect me? If God provided for you, could he provide for me? And that's why we need to be unleashing those stories. We share them with other Christians, but when we share them with non-believers, they're intrigued by that.
Yeah. And I know in a sermon you don't have the time to tell a lot of those stories. So are there some other stories that you can relate? And I love this because some people, when they think about sharing Jesus with other people, and well-intentioned, they've got a zinger question. If you died tonight, and where would you go? And again, well-intentioned, but sometimes, most of the time, that doesn't work. So what you're sharing is this organic. I'll even use the word whimsical. Hey, I've got a story you need to hear, or I'd love to share with you in a way to testify to God's faithfulness, His power, His provision. So. Anyway, other stories that maybe you didn't have time to share over the weekend. Well,
I'm thinking of one. But you got one in your mind?
Yeah, I got one. I had a good friend. I still have this good friend, but years ago, one of her parents was dying, and she was a seeker at the time, and so I actually brought a Bible over to her home. And I said, I know this is a hard time for you right now. I just want to share with you some passages that have helped me through difficult times in my life. She was so open to that. And actually, after her parent passed away, we had dinner with them, and she shared with me, Sherry, the only way I got through that time was reading one of the main passages I shared with her. Yeah. And she has since made a commitment. But it was during that time of seeking that I was just able to say, this is how I've gotten through hard times, and actually brought a Bible over. And it's kind of an interesting story because I found out that she told another person, she told other people that how she made it through that time was Bible verses that I had given to her. So she's giving testimony.
And she's not even a Christian.
Before she's a Christian.
At that point.
Of God's goodness and the power of His Word.
So awesome.
That is. And we have stories like that. And like you said, it doesn't have to be pushy.
And here's a story I've told many times. And I shared this with my dad. I've shared this with non-believers. And it goes back, before we were talking about God's provision. And so early on in our marriage, we were in a time where we were really struggling. And Sherry, actually, she was my sweet sugar mama. She was teaching at the Christian school, which didn't pay a lot, but it paid something. And so she was our income, really, while I was going through seminary. And she felt a call to go to seminary, which meant that she'd have to stop teaching, which means, very selfishly, the school stopped paying her. What's that about? But when she stopped teaching, they were going to pay her. So we had to figure out our finances, and it was just, we were already living on the razor's edge, but she felt this call. And we went through a whole process. That's another story we could tell about how God moved and guided, and God's direction. But in this case, as we talked about this together. When I'm trying to think where I was.
You're probably going to talk about Mark.
Oh, Mark. Yeah. So
This is why we need each other.
Exactly.
Teamwork
Well,
right there. Yeah.
my mind was going back to the whole story.
Skates were slipping out from underneath him.
Exactly. No, but I started thinking about her going to seminary. But but this guy Mark, did you turn your phone off?
Yes.
I turned mine off, but it must not be on. Well, hold that thought.
Hold this thought. We might edit this out, and we might not edit this out. Yes.
Probably. Let's edit it out.
Well, and and you sharing that story of giving someone a Bible, and I'm sure you've got other stories where you did that and the person never looked at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just for your team there, I'll pick this up right here.
Yeah.
Well, as you were sharing that story, I was thinking of a story that goes back to the topic of generosity and giving and God's provision. And early on in our marriage, in that time where we were struggling financially, there was a guy who I had shared Jesus with a couple months after I became a Christian. I started working at a place called Munchie's Pizza. When I became a Christian, I was working at Carl's Jr. And then I got an offer to work at Munchie's Pizza. They offered to pay me twice as much as I was making, double minimum wage to spin pies and to do that kind of thing. And so this guy who worked there just hated me. I never met him, never talked to him, and he wouldn't speak to me. He was just hostile. Turns out later I found out they gave me the job they had promised to him. And so he had reason to be mad, but he didn't know me. So anyways, we became friends. I began basically sharing my story with him. I listened to his story. We came into each other's lives a bit, and he over time became a follower of Jesus and a really neat guy. And so we became friends, walked for a season. Well, then by the time we were married, living in Pasadena, going to seminary, I would touch base with Mark maybe once a year, but we weren't connecting a whole lot. And we actually were at a point where we had to pay some bills, didn't have the money. And one day, there's this knock on the front door of this little triplex. We live in the front unit of this little triplex in Pasadena. Open the door, and it's Mark. He's a motorcycle guy, so he was wearing all his. And I didn't know he was coming. I said, Mark. I said, what? I said, come in. What are you doing here? He came in and sat down, and this guy says to me and to Sherry, he says, well, he said this morning I was reading my Bible and praying, and just talking to Jesus, and he put on my heart that you guys are struggling. You need money. And I'm like, okay, and I wasn't even really praying that much for. You were probably praying as more than I was at that point in terms of about that. And so he gave us this envelope full of cash, and I don't remember how much it was, but it felt like $1 million because we were so broke. It might have been a couple hundred or something like that. But he basically said, and God put on my heart, I'm supposed to give you this amount every month until you get done with school. Wow. And I hadn't called him. I hadn't told any of my friends. He didn't hear from me. He heard from the Lord. Now, Tom, when I share that story with somebody, I can look at them and say, I'm a pastor. I don't even know exactly how all that works. I just know that he didn't say, he said, God specifically said, Kevin and Sherry need this money. Go give it to him. And he got on his motorcycle and he drove up and he did it. I said, I know the provision of God and the power of God.
It was miraculous.
Yeah, it was
for
miraculous.
us.
But when people hear that kind of a story, they either have to go, you're lying, or you're crazy, or maybe God does that kind of stuff, and maybe I should look into this God. And that story becomes it opens the door for another conversation.
Excellent. So telling stories of God's transformation, not always, but many times, is happening in the context of some type of relationship. But another part of your sermon was asking questions just in the day-to-day of life. So many times this would be with someone you're just meeting for the first time.
Absolutely.
It's by chance. You may never see this person again. And you taught us about asking questions and then listening. Could you unpack that a little bit more? And again, maybe some stories of how you ask questions and listen.
Well, I'll give the framework for anybody who didn't hear the sermon, and I'd love to have you, because this is something Sherry does. We both do it in our own way. But the basic concept is a lot of times when it comes to sharing our faith, as Christians, we meet someone, and if we're enthusiastic about it, we're just looking for that on-ramp to tell them the story of Jesus. And oftentimes we're not concerned about them or their background or their story. But here's the thing. You don't know what a person's needs are, where their life's at, until you've asked questions and listened, and really listened. We have a friend who's a pastor on our team. He's got a couple degrees in counseling, and he's a great guy. And he'll say when you ask someone a question and then they respond, you should ask at least 4 more questions. Keep asking questions. And then you see where their heart's at, where their life is at. And so, yes, and Jesus modeled this by asking more questions than he answered. He gave more questions than he gave answers. And sometimes when people would ask him a question, he wouldn't even give an answer. He'd ask a question back. And so it's, and again, if we're supposed to be like Jesus, we should be people who ask questions and then listen. And so I've got a couple of thoughts, but I'd love to hear Sherry.
No, go ahead. You're doing great.
Okay, well, one of the things and I'm always trying to just figure out how to engage with people, and not with this in the back of my mind. I've got to dump Jesus on them, and I got to give the whole gospel. But just to get to know people and hear their stories. And so this is something I've been doing in the last couple of months that just hit me. I study people, I watch people, and if someone periodically, and if the people listening to this or watching this, they'll know what I'm talking about. You'll watch somebody. They might work at a fast food place. They might be a server at a restaurant. They might be a school teacher. They might work in some environment that you're in, and they do it beautifully. They do it with excellence. They're kind of above and beyond. And you just look at me and go, man, whatever you end up doing with your rest of your life, you're going to be good because you just do an amazing job. But what I've started to do is when I see someone like that, if the environment allows me to, if there's time, I'll say, can I ask you 2 questions? And they'll usually say, sure. And I say, because here's the deal. I've been watching you, and you're amazing at what you do. You're exceptional, and because we travel so much with our work, we're in a lot of restaurants, and so the service industry has fallen on hard times, and there's not a lot of times you get people that aren't very interested or very engaged. But when you have someone who's really doing a great job, I'll say, I'm just watching you. And I just recently with somebody, I made a comment to a server, and I said, you just do your work with such grace and such excellence. And I said, and not everyone in the service industry is like that these days. And she actually goes, no, they're not. She acknowledged that, and I said, so my question is, are there 1 or 2 people that you've watched in your life that have modeled this kind of passion and excellence? And it's almost always a parent, a friend, a grandparent. I had a woman in a Mexican restaurant a while back. She said to me, my children have become such a model to me. And I thought, what a beautiful thing. And so when I ask that question, somebody shares, these are people that have modeled excellence and effort and diligence. I'll often ask the question, well, here's my second question. Are those people that have influenced you, is faith, meaningful personal faith, an influence in their lives? And it's been surprising how often that is the case. Yeah, my grandmother, she's a committed Catholic. This person may not be, but grandma, and I let them talk about that. In some cases, not. And I actually asked one person, one woman, and she said, boy, the family environment I grew up in, I didn't have a lot of examples. I'm trying to become that example to the next generation. I thought, that's a beautiful story. Yeah. But those conversations, and when you listen and get to know them, there's a bridge that's built, and if God uses that as an open door to talk about faith, and oftentimes God does, that's great, but it's not forced. Right. The last time I had one of these conversations, it didn't turn into let me tell you about Jesus. It actually ended up with Sherry and I both getting a big hug from this person, and we said we hope to see you again, and we'll see where God takes that. Surprising
excellence. So noticing it and calling it out when appropriate. This isn't something you tell everybody, right? But surprising excellence. And, as Christians, we're supposed to be the most generous people, and that means with our words, too.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And, when's the last time someone came up and gave us a compliment like that? I mean, we need more positive feedback like that so we actually can be the light of Christ without even mentioning his name, just by calling that out in someone. That's just so cool.
And I think a key theme in what you were just describing, though, is trying to build some kind of relationship. And what better way than to ask questions? And just to get to know somebody, you got to ask some questions about them, And so for me, that's a thing that I do, just to say, I care about you. I'm interested in you. I'm not coming with an agenda.
Right.
I actually care about you. And sometimes the Lord opens the doors for, faith conversations. Sometimes not. And then I'm careful not to push myself through that, But to care for people as you meet them, get to know them, and as the Lord leads, as doors get open. And oftentimes they do. oftentimes they do.
And one of the passages that we looked at in the message is the 1 Peter 3:15. And I have it here in front of me. It says, you'll always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason. What's the reason? For the hope that you have. Our hope is in Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. But do this with gentleness and respect. But here's what it says. Always be prepared to give an answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It doesn't say always force it on someone. Mm-hmm. So I'm ready.
And I think that verse points also to the fact that your life should open up doors for questions like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
I always say that's the $1 million question. I mean, if you can serve with all your heart, hopefully what someone might say to you is, why did you do that? What makes you what makes you like that? I mean, I've had it happen to me.
Yeah.
And those have been some of the greatest conversations I've had with an unbeliever. Yeah. To say, you really want to know? Yeah. And I'll say that to them. I'll say, you really want to know? Yeah. And then the doors open. Yeah. Say, this is why.
Yeah.
Jesus,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think back, so it was about a year and a half ago when Janet and I first met you. Well, we were at breakfast up in Lake Mary.
I remember.
That's right.
Beach Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I don't remember her name, but our server.
Yes, your server.
And you got in a little conversation with her, and she was working her way through school, and eventually she said, "Oh, is this your first time here?" "No, we're from out of town." "Oh, what brings you to town?"
Right.
"Oh, I'm preaching at Northland." And if I remember correctly, it wasn't that visit, but the next visit, you were here.
She
This
came.
was just this fall.
Right.
And after you preached, she walked up to you in the foyer and said, right?
With her daughter. With her daughter.
And she had started coming to Northland and I think at that breakfast, because we will sometimes, not always, but if a server lingers and we'll sometimes say, hey, when our food comes, we're going to say a prayer. Is there anything we can pray for you? And again, I don't force that and do it every time. I think anything that's a rote behavior is dangerous because every person, this is why you ask questions, because if you ask a person a question and they say, oh, I'm not a person of faith, I don't believe in that, you go, oh, that makes you uncomfortable. No, now you know something about them. They have no faith background. So if there is a conversation, you're starting from ground zero. That's okay. But this I think we actually prayed for that gal, and then she came up and introduced herself after I preached, 2 times ago, I think, and she said, my daughter's here. She's got involved in the children's programming. She loves it. And you go, well, how does that all work? Well, God's hand is in it. We just make ourselves available to asking questions and listening and learning people's story. We had a recent conversation with a server in a restaurant where we got to hear a lot of her story, that she had just graduated, some of her family background, and it was a sweet time, but we didn't feel like we needed to go into the whole gospel at that point. We just wanted to bless her and encourage her. And so,
So Kevin and Sherry, there might be some people watching and listening to this, and they might be a little skeptical. They might go, well, okay, there's 30, 45 minutes. This person's working for a tip. Of course, they're going to pay attention to you. Sherry, could you maybe share just a little bit about what happened when you checked into the hotel in this particular trip about asking someone?
Yeah, the one.
And he wasn't working for a tip, so that's why I'm asking you to tell the story.
But just like you said, we started to have a conversation. A wonderful man, and he of course asked, "What are you here for?" And I'm not pushy at that point. I just say, "Well, we're going to do some work at a church," and then he started talking a little bit about church experience for him. But by the time the conversation was done, I was able to invite him. He says he's coming. So I'm actually going to be looking for him.
And he's greeted us warmly in and out of the hotel a couple times since then.
Awesome.
He's been
the last
great.
48 hours. Yeah.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, just taking the opportunity to ask questions and listen.
Right.
Well, it's fantastic for you guys to be here. However, we only get you like maybe 4 or 5 days, in the spring, 4 or 5 days in the fall. And I know you guys are all over literally the world doing ministry. So tell our audience, what are some of the things that you're seeing around the globe when it comes to King Jesus?
Well, we were just in New Zealand for I think it was November or December. It was December.
December, yeah.
It was December.
Summertime for them.
Yeah, and actually what we were doing there is we actually have a cohort with about 8 church leaders from churches from the North Island and the South Island. We've been doing work there for about 15 years. And talk about just seeing what God is doing. We're seeing a change in New Zealand, and we're working with these pastors of good-sized churches in Wellington, Auckland, Taronga, Christchurch. And these pastors are passionate about sharing Jesus.
Yes.
They care about the unbeliever. And so it's very exciting to actually be working a little more with them this coming year, just because they're seeing the growth and they want some more encouragement, some more direction. But that's been exciting for us to be a part of that.
Yeah. And we had a team of national leaders doing training in 7 or 8 countries in Africa just last month. And a whole series. One of our trainers was going to go over there, and there were some challenges that came up. But I said, "Are we going to be okay without you there?" And he said, "Oh, we have national leaders that are going to be going to each of these countries." And so a lot of what we do is we go into a country, we train leaders there, and we'll find a bishop or a leader there, pour into them, and then we'll be able to cover the expenses of them doing training once they're trained and gone through our processes. And then we provide all the resources for free. And we resource them. So it actually costs our ministry to do training in most countries. But God is using it. So I think this last time around, I think we had between 300 and 400 pastors that were trained, and then multiplying. We did a training, our first training in Ethiopia happened about 7 or 8 months ago. And there were 4 Ethiopian pastors who came back and said, can we translate all your materials into our dialects? And so there's in Africa, there's lots of tribal and dialects, and it's just one of the unique parts of that part of the world. And we said, absolutely, our only condition, we have 2 conditions if you translate this. Number 1, that you give it away because we gave it to you for free. And if freely you've received, Jesus says, like with the gospel, freely receive, freely give. So you can't monetize what we've created and given to you for free. And second of all, along with not doing that, not charging for it, is that you'll give us your copies so that we can then share it with other people who need your language. And so we did training there. About 3 months later, there were 4 more national training events in 4 different dialects that we weren't even there for, because the people we train will say, "But this is so simple," and we're like, "Yeah, we got it all from the Bible. It's not very complicated. It's love people, get to know them, walk with them, ask good questions. Things we're talking. It's just live out a life of faith." And so we're seeing on a global scale, there's a hunger for the gospel among non-believers. Our world is mixed up and people are recognizing a need for more. And there's a hunger among leaders to be equipped and trained. And Sherry and I have devoted our lives to equipping and training leaders, whether it's leaders here at Northland Church, or whether it's leaders in far exotic places like Vero Beach, Florida, where we were last week and where I preached last week. Or this next week we'll be in Palm Desert, the desert area in Palm Springs, Palm Desert, training about 70 to 90 pastors there. And that's kind of our journey, is where is God taking us and trying to be faithful.
Wow, that's great. Final question. So you each have 40 plus years of ministry context here in the U.S., grew up here, did most of your ministry, and then obviously another decade or more international. Anything that you're seeing or learning on the international scale that maybe the church here in America should pay heed to?
Yeah. Well, I think that, and this leans into what Sherry started to say about New Zealand. 5 or 6 years ago, there was more resistance, and there was more kind of apathy about things of faith. They weren't just against faith, just kind of like, that's not for us. And there seems to be, and they're probably further down the road we are in being post-Christian in that part of the world. It's very European in that sense. So, but I think here in the States and here in Florida, I would say, and this has always been true, but I think it's growing. There's a higher level of openness to spiritual things, especially if you're talking to somebody who says they're Muslim in their background. If you don't ask them, well, tell me about your faith, you're missing a point, because they might say, well, I don't really practice it. Now you learn something. Or they might just start talking about it. And because I had a person I knew who was from the Middle East, and he had heard somebody say, well, we try not to talk about politics or religion. And he goes, then what else is there to talk about? He said, that's all we talk about is politics and religion. And he meant it. He was like, and so when you meet people from other religions even, don't get intimidated. Say, tell me about your faith and how does it help you through the day? In most cases, they're going to go, well, it's not a faith that, even if they're devout, it doesn't transform their lives because it's not built on life in Christ. And so just ask those questions, and so here's what I see. Globally, there's a growing movement. There's more revival happening in Latin America than there is in the U.S. There's more revival happening in Africa than there is in the U.S. But let's pray for and know that we are in a time where there's a growing spiritual opening. There's more Bibles being bought right now than any time in history. There's more spiritual curiosity. And so always be prepared to give an account for the hope that's in you, but do it with gentleness and respect. There's more opportunities. Let's step into them.
Amen. Yeah. Great.
And I want to say one thank you, because some of your listeners that are from Northland Church don't know this, but Northland Church, every 6 months, we are a partner mission of Northland Church. And so your church sends a check to help support our ministry every 6 months. And I want to say to those that are listening from Northland, if you ever think to yourself, what's my money going towards? Let me tell you what Sherry and I are doing and our team is doing internationally. We've trained, I think, between 30 and 40,000 leaders in face-to-face training over the last season of this organic outreach ministry. That's going to keep growing. And Northland Church is part of that. So Tom, thank you to you, and thank you to any listener that's part of Northland. When you give to Northland, you're giving to the world.
Well, it is our pleasure. It is a pleasure to do ministry with you and be a partner. Yeah. And thank you so much for this past weekend and looking forward to the fall.
Yes, we are too.
When you come back, it really is an honor and a privilege to do ministry with you. Yeah. And Northland family and friends, we get to do ministry every day, and we get to do it this coming week as well. So looking forward to having Pastor Josh back up on stage. We're going to be back in our series on Genesis. So, blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.